First came the protests, then the resignation. A government minister in Pakistan has stepped down after days of disruptive protests over accusations of blasphemy. It was organised by a new political movement. So how powerful are groups like these? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Protest leaders in Pakistan have called off a 3-week sit-in near the capital after a government minister resigned. It was a victory for the protest leaders who'd been demanding Zahid Hamid step down over the wording of a parliamentary oath. They accused him of blasphemy. The ministers apologised, saying it was a clerical error. The Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan political party, or TLP, led by the scholar Khadim Hussain Rizvi, says the change in wording represented a softening of the state's position towards the Ahmadi sect. The Ahmadis were banned from identifying as Muslim in Pakistan in 1974. So there's a lot to discuss with our guests, but in just a moment. But first, this report from Kamal Haider in Islamabad.
This is the epicenter of a protest that began 22 days ago. But it was the botched attempt by the government security forces to dislodge the protesters at this intersection called Faizabad that changed everything. The rioting then spread across the country, forcing the law minister to resign. But as you can see now, tens of thousands of supporters are now gathering at this point, which will be remembered for a long time to come. And it is not just the law minister who will pay the price, but there is now scathing criticism against the country's interior minister, who has failed to deliver and failed to solve this problem. It shows that there is a dysfunctional government in Islamabad that cannot control anything. And it also appears that the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz is going to take heavy attrition from what happened here. They are going to lose support in their heartland, which is the Punjab province. It seems it may be the beginning of the end of the ruling party.
Well, blasphemy is a highly contentious issue in Pakistan, and there have been a number of high-profile cases in recent years. Since 1990, at least 73 people have been killed over alleged blasphemy. That's according to an Al Jazeera tally. In April, Mashal Khan was stripped, beaten, shot and then thrown from the second floor of his university dormitory after being falsely accused of blasphemy. Asia Bibi, who's a Christian, was convicted and sentenced to hang in 2010 after an argument with a Muslim woman over a bowl of water. 2 prominent politicians who tried to help her were both assassinated. She remains on death row. And there have been many blasphemy-related attacks over the past few years, forcing some minorities to flee the country. Well, let's now talk to our guests here in Doha. Naveed Ahmad, an investigative journalist and academic. In Lahore, joining us via Skype, Ahmad Rashid, a writer and author on the book Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. And in London, Nadia Rahman, Relief and Protection Manager at Amnesty International. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here with us on Inside Story. First of all, let's just get an idea of what's actually happening in Pakistan at the moment. Ahmed, the protesters may have ended their sit-ins, but are they going to be coming back out onto the streets?
Well, I think this protest has much deeper roots than just a question of religious tolerance. And after all, the government apologized about the wrong oath that it took. It changed the wording, etc. What this protest is really about, and what we're seeing now, is an accumulation of protests in the build-up to the elections next year. In the last few months, the fundamentalist parties have formed several alliances with support from partial support from the military. It denies it, of course, but there's a lot of speculation that some of these parties have been mobilized by the military, in particularly Mr. Hafiz Saeed, who is the leader of the Tehreek, of a militant group that has fights in Kashmir and was responsible for the Mumbai bombing in 2008. He's been freed from house arrest, and there's every likelihood he will be starting a religious movement also. Now, this particular group, which staged this countrywide protest, is actually very small. The protesters in Islamabad were never more than a few thousand, and in Punjab, where I am again, there have been a lot of closures of roads and sit-downs, but the numbers of people involved have been very, very small.
So Naveed, if I could just jump in there, Ahmed, to get an idea from our guest here in the studio, from Naveed, if this group is so small and such a fringe group, how has it managed to be so successful? How has it managed to hold siege to Islamabad and other cities for 3 weeks?
Well, the ruling party's policy since it took over the government has been to wait out the crisis. They would not handle, Nawaz Sharif and his cabinet ministers would not handle the situation and would not address the issues. They'll just wait it out and try to find a way around it. And that's what didn't work previously, and it didn't work this time as well. But now there will be a cost. There will be a huge cost which will basically impinge on Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz's future, showing in the elections and even in the build-up to that. It may cause, desertions within the party, and it will be, and of course, Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz has still some time to continue ruling till the election date is announced and the term is complete. It's really a dysfunctional government, and it hasn't been able to address much of the issues that we are facing.
We certainly will look more at the impact this has had on the ruling party and the government in just a moment. Nadia, first of all, though, I just want to bring you in here because ostensibly these protests were about this change to the electoral law. Whether or not that was the protesters' end game is something we'll also look at. But just talk us through why these changes caused so much upset.
The change was, as we know, relating to the Ahmadi clause, or it was relating to an amendment to the election law in Pakistan. And it caused a lot of upset because it was seen as though the government was softening on its take on the Ahmadi issue in Pakistan. Now, it didn't have very much to do with the blasphemy laws. But the blasphemy laws were used as a ruse to spark up religious sentiment. And that's what the really dangerous thing around everything that's happened in the past 3 weeks and a little bit longer has been, is that the blasphemy laws, as we know, have been used by religious parties, by lots of different people, not just against religious minorities, but also against the largely Sunni majority in Pakistan also. And they've been used for political reasons, they've been used for religious motives, they've been used for personal motives. But now we've seen that on a very large scale they have been. I know that Ahmed Rashid said that it was a small protest, and it was. But the ramifications of it are very, very, very big.
I just want to know, Ahmed, whether the government was actually trying to soften its stance on the Ahmadis, because they're not recognised as Muslim in Pakistan. Was the government trying to take a small step towards being more inclusive, more tolerant?
It's very difficult to say what the reason was for the change. The government has said that it was a clerical error. They've started an investigation into why the changes took place. And that's one of the things that were signed upon in the agreement that the government signed with the protesters today. They said that they would release a report of the inquiry. So it's very difficult to say what the reasons were. But whatever those reasons were, that they don't give a religiously motivated, violent group the right to hold an entire capital hostage in many ways. I was in Islamabad myself a few days ago where there was a massive lockdown. It was very difficult to enter Islamabad from Rawalpindi or leave and go to Rawalpindi. There were massive road blockages. People couldn't go to work. People were stopped from going to the hospital. A little child also died because he couldn't make it to the hospital in time. He was caught up in the traffic jam caused by the protest. So this kind of holding a country to hostage for and issuing threats against citizens of the country, against sitting government ministers, it's just unacceptable. And it shows that the government was unable to essentially uphold rule of law. And it sets a very, very dangerous precedent in terms of what might follow. It essentially shows that the government is weak, the state can't enforce its writ, and that anybody can essentially just come and use the blasphemy laws as a ruse and hold many people hostage. I mean, the law minister stepping down, it's a big,
Absolutely.
big step.
I mean, Ahmed, we are seeing a situation here, aren't we, where we're seeing groups like this holding the government or whomever they choose to hold, be it the justice ministers or just individuals on the street, to ransom using the blasphemy law.
Yes, but I think there's been a much deeper political motive. And remember, the last 3 or 4 months, the ruling party has suffered grievous losses. The Prime Minister was forced to resign. The Finance Minister has handed in his resignation. And now we've had the resignation of the Law Minister. The same group is trying to get another minister in Punjab province to resign as well. And in fact, in Lahore, the demonstrations are still continuing because they want this minister to resign. So they have really, this short, sharp movement by a few thousand people has really bled the government white. And there's now a lot of pressure on the government, on Nawaz Sharif in particular, who's still the acting head of the ruling party, even though he's not prime minister. There's a lot of pressure on him to announce now an early election. The problem is he wants to wait until March, because in March there will be elections for the upper house of parliament, which he's likely to win a large number of seats. He's trying to drag out his tenure until March. The political opposition, the religious parties, and some would say even the military, are not prepared to wait that long, and they want him to announce early elections, and then presumably to fight those elections and lose, given the build-up of opposition to him.
The military is an interesting point. I want to bring that in now. Naveed, the army spent most of Sunday negotiating with the government before getting involved in actually evicting the protesters. Why was it so hesitant?
First of all, the military primarily has been thinly spread out, and they were careful with regards to engaging in another front which is very domestic. Secondly, whenever political government invokes military into domestic issues, they would look at it from a national security perspective. And for them, this China-Pakistan corridor is a vital security issue that they have to deal with, particularly regarding down south in Balochistan. Some of their concerns were genuine. Some of them were that the political government cannot make military a scapegoat for the problems that they could not address over the past entire term. The police that they were trying to use was ill-equipped, demoralized, not properly trained, and there was no strategy. Then the government goes on and switches off, blocks all the televisions, channels, tells them not to air anything. They go off air at the same time, social media. So all of these things were creating a pressure on the military to deliver and be seen as part of what's going on. And military wants to stay clear of this political mess on one side. The opponents or the critics will say, no, military was behind it. They were trying to instigate, and there was a pat on the back behind these fringe group, which of course I agree is a very small, will not have a major impact on for itself, but eventually destroys the whole scenario for Pakistan in future. So their decision was that we would not be engaged in a situation where there could be bloodshed and there could be ramification for military's own image, which has been busy with Waziristan and also in Balochistan and also with the border on India.
Ahmed, if we have a weak government here, a weak ruling party, can the PLMN rely on the military's support?
Well, I think this incident has proved that it can't, because the military, 2 nights ago, the military had pledged to enter Islamabad, and there is a clause in the constitution which allows the government to call on the military to help it restore law and order without, taking over or without imposing martial law. And everyone presumed 2 days ago that that is exactly what the military would do, that they would come in and that they would then force the protesters to back down. But the military never turned up, and that embarrassed the government and deeply annoyed the government also, and left them stranded, if you like. And eventually, the government had to succumb to all of the demands of the protesters. Now that was particularly humiliating because it included not only the resignation of the law minister, but the release of all the protesters that the police had arrested earlier. And the government will have to pay for all the damages done to the local infrastructure. So the protesters have not conceded anything. They've won everything. And that's why this has been so humiliating for the government.
Nadia, are we seeing a rise in popularity for these hardline religious groups?
Yes, and I think what's also really worrying is, yes, as Ahmad said, a lot of it is linked to the elections. A lot of it is linked to growing popularity of these groups and also the takedown of the PMLN government. But what's worrying is how the government is has been peddling an agenda that actually assists them, that actually helps them along. So earlier this year, the government ordered that on the behest of a High Court judgment from Islamabad that all blasphemous social media material must be taken down. Subsequent to that, text messages were sent across Pakistan to all its citizens saying that if you read any blasphemous material, that it should be reported. Now, this kind of thing is very unhelpful because essentially what it does is that it gives power to vigilant mobs. It gives power to people like the groups protesting to take the law into their own hands. And we've seen this happen time and time again, except the frequency is now growing. We saw this in Mashal Khan's case. We also see, and Amnesty has recorded this extensively, that once somebody is actually accused of blasphemy, it doesn't matter if the accusation is correct or incorrect. The mere accusation is going to land that person and his family and his lawyers and anyone else associated with them in a lot of trouble. And the dangerous aspect of this, the government doesn't clearly realize, but this is now haunting the government itself. The law minister, we hope that will be provided with security and with protection, and along with with his family, with anybody who protects him. But this is a larger problem, and the government should tackle these laws immediately, because unless that happens, more and more space is being given to these groups by actions that they've been helping tolerate. This intolerance is growing.
Naveed, the law minister, or the TLP rather, this group, the protesters, leading the protests, said that it would not issue a fatwa against the law minister. Is he safe?
That's a big question mark. I don't think he's safe. I don't think whatever he has sent out a video message, and that will serve many. It just needs a couple of fanatics to go somewhere in somebody's property and throw oil and set it alight. That's it. And then life for him will not be very secure. The issue basically, as my colleague in London was saying, relates with the willpower of the political parties. Today is Zahid Hamid. Tomorrow there could be Nawaz Sharif himself or somebody else from the People's Party or Imran Khan's party. And when they are in a position, they try to take leverage out of these controversies and would not really gather in the parliament. When inside the parliament, the only issue that is concerning is protecting how Pakistan doesn't side too much with Saudi Arabia and hurt Iran because there is a lobby. But in general, the issues that really concern a common man do not get a collective voice within the parliament. For example, this issue should have been addressed right after Mishal was killed in Peshawar. But this did not happen, and it continued to linger on, and we saw a major nationwide blockade, and the image issue and the exports and all the life, everything was was lost, and Nawaz Sharif's own party, which is a ruling party, suffered. There is no political, consensus within the political parties that these are the issues we need to handle above or beyond political benefits and point scoring.
Ahmed, do you agree with that? I mean, is there anyone in Pakistan that is willing or is trying to keep this sort of rising extremism in check?
Well, something like the blasphemy law, frankly, nobody is willing to tackle. I mean, the army made it clear that they're not willing to tackle anyone who's standing up, against blasphemy. And remember that this group arose 4 years ago after the killing of the governor of Punjab, Salman Taseer, by his bodyguard, because the bodyguard accused the governor of blasphemy and then shot him dead. Eventually, this killer was arrested and later hanged. But this group arose out of calling the killer a martyr and calling him a hero, and his grave is now a shrine for many hardliners to go there and pray for his blessing. So the issue really is that, and at that time too, the military, the bureaucracy, the judiciary, nobody was willing to take a stand against somebody being accused of blasphemy. And that is the problem. Certainly at the political level, we don't have a single politician who's willing to really stand up and be counted on this score. And the middle class, if you like, the urban middle class and educated people are left bereft of any kind of objection to these kinds of extreme steps.
Yeah, Naveed, where are the moderate voices in Pakistan?
The moderate voices are not represented in political parties. Every political party comes up with the same kind of faces every time. And there is no real democracy or representation of real people. Still, the election laws need reforms, the election process needs refining, and the media needs to cover and follow up the story. And that has been the tragedy partly too. Being a journalist, I can say that after Mishal, there was not enough pressure from media on legislatures to really ensure that the elaborate process of police reporting and the way it should, if there is a blasphemy reported, it should not be, there is a mechanism that is never in place. And just that if you are socially seen as a blasphemer, one has to face the consequences. That could be enforced. The procedural issues are not intact, not being enforced, and eventually people take it in their own hands. That's why moderates, wherever they are trying to, they were trying to participate in political process, but there is no political voice. For example, Imran Khan's party, which was seen as a clean party, a Justice League or whatever, it has got the same faces from other political parties baptized by Imran Khan, and then now they represent his party, which is just the same minus Imran Khan. All parties are the same. So there is no, as such, voice for the moderates who really understand and who pay the price. A common man in the street paid the price, who could not go to work, who could not open his shop.
So Nadia, do you fear that we're just going to see a Pakistan that grows more intolerant?
I do fear that, yes. It's been a very depressing and a very, I'm very sad today to see the government completely capitulating to the demands of these protesters. As I was coming in to the studio, I also heard about money being given to these protesters by the military. I think that or was it the Rangers? I'm not sure either of the two. But one of the things that is really worrying is the fact that these blasphemy laws are in place. As my colleague in Doha said, it's true that at the moment it's a PMLN government. It could be someone else. It was a PPP government with Salman Taseer a few years ago. It could be anyone else. And while some government ministers, some parliamentarians might agree that the blasphemy laws either need to be amended or the procedural safeguards need to be put in place a little bit more strongly so that the misuse of these laws can be curtailed, they won't actually go ahead and make these amendments in law and policy because they're fearful for their lives. They're fearful of things like what has happened in the past couple of weeks happening to them. So it's a really, it's a really tricky thing where you may have some people who are on side, who believe that these laws need to be put in place, where citizens of the country need to be protected, but they're not willing to risk their necks. And these are the consequences. We can see that quite clearly.
Many thanks to all three of you for joining us today for this discussion. We will have to leave it there. Naveed Ahmed here in the studio, Ahmed Rashid in Lahore, and Nadia Rahman in London. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.